That's another $500 fine, Mr. Harrison. Your service to this country doesn't exempt you from our bylaws. And until you remove that unauthorized pile of construction debris, you'll get one every single day. Karen, the self-appointed queen of Serenity Lakes Estates, stood on the pristine sidewalk just beyond my property line. Her plus-size frame squeezed into a fluorescent pink tracksuit that screamed for attention. She held a clipboard like a weapon, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered across her face as she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at a neatly stacked pallet of brand-new roofing shingles. The morning sun glinted off the plastic cover, making them look anything but debris. This was the 47th violation notice she had personally delivered in 3 months, a campaign of paper-cut harassment that was quickly escalating into a war of financial attrition. The fines now totaled over $20,000, a figure designed not to ensure compliance, but to break me. She saw the flash of anger in my eyes and her smirk widened. "You can scowl all you want," she chirped, "but that lien is going on your house next week. Maybe you military types are good at following orders, but you're about to learn you need to follow rules too. If you're already sick and tired of power-tripping Karens just like this one, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from or share your own HOA nightmare. I promise you, the story of how this woman's little empire came crashing down is worth sticking around for. Now let me take you back to how this whole mess began on a day that should have been about honoring a legacy, not starting a war. It all started with my parents' house, or more accurately, my grandparents' house. It was a beautiful 2-acre plot with a sprawling, single-story ranch home my grandfather, a carpenter by trade, had built with his own 2 hands back in 1968. The property sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, bordered by a thick line of ancient oak trees he'd planted as saplings. It was an island of history, a tangible piece of my family's soul. When my parents passed away within a year of each other, the house fell to me, their only son. I had just retired from 25 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, and the timing felt like destiny. My plan wasn't just to sell it, it was to restore it. I wanted to bring the place back to its former glory, to honor the sweat and love my grandfather poured into every joist and rafter, and then maybe, just maybe, settle down for good. The surrounding area had changed, of course. The farmland that once stretched for miles had been carved up in the late 90s to create Serenity Lakes Estates, a sprawling subdivision of cookie-cutter beige houses with perfectly manicured lawns and an iron-fisted homeowners association. My family had refused to sell, so the development simply wrapped around our 2 acres, creating a strange peninsula of old-world character in a sea of suburban uniformity. My property was never formally annexed into the HOA. It was a historical carve-out, a fact clearly stated in the original development plans I found in a dusty box in the attic. My first encounter with Karen was deceptively pleasant. I was out front, wrestling a stubborn, overgrown bougainvillea that had started to pull siding off the western wall. A golf cart impossibly quiet rolled up my driveway. Behind the wheel was a woman whose visor and pastel polo shirt practically screamed, "Suburban Authority." "Welcome to the neighborhood," she'd said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Karen Miller, the president of the HOA. We are all just so thrilled to see someone finally giving this old place some attention." I thanked her, explaining my connection to the house and my plans for a full restoration. Her eyes scanned the property, lingering on the peeling paint of the trim and the slightly faded front door. "Well, that's wonderful," she'd said, pulling a laminated booklet from the passenger seat. "Here's a copy of our community covenants, conditions, and restrictions. You'll want to familiarize yourself with the architectural guidelines and approved color palettes before you get started on any painting. We have a very specific aesthetic we maintain here at Serenity Lakes." I took the booklet, a bit confused. "Thanks, but my property isn't actually part of the HOA. A flicker of something cold crossed her face before the sweet smile snapped back into place. "Oh, that's a common misconception. All properties within the geographic boundaries are subject to the bylaws for the sake of community harmony and property values. It's all in there." She patted the booklet in my hand. Just a formality. Have a wonderful day. And with that, she was gone, leaving me with a glossy rulebook and a knot forming in my stomach. The first notice arrived a week later, a crisp white envelope taped to my front door. It was a warning. My mailbox, the original heavy steel one my grandfather had set in concrete, was a non-compliant model. The approved models were listed on page 27 of the CC&Rs. This was just the beginning of her campaign, the first probing attack to test my defenses. I was a man who had planned and overseen the construction of forward operating bases in the middle of deserts under constant threat. I thought dealing with a suburban HOA president would be simple. I was wrong. It wasn't simple. It was a meticulously planned siege. The mailbox warning was just the opening salvo. Thinking it was a simple misunderstanding, a case of an overzealous welcome wagon, I decided the path of least resistance was the wisest. I spent a Saturday afternoon sanding down the old, heavy-duty steel mailbox and giving it a fresh coat of semi-gloss black paint, which matched the description in her little rulebook. It looked sharp, clean, and frankly, better than the cheap plastic ones most of my neighbors had. I felt a small sense of accomplishment, a tiny step in the massive project of restoring the home. The following Monday, another envelope was taped to my door. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a $100 fine. The violation? Unauthorized paint finish. According to a subclause on page 28, all mailboxes were to have a matte black finish, not semi-gloss. My compliance had been met not with approval, but with a penalty for imperfect obedience. It was then I realized Karen wasn't interested in harmony. She was interested in control. I drove to the approved hardware store, bought the ridiculously expensive can of Serenity Lakes Estates approved matte black number 4, and repainted the mailbox. I even sent her a polite email with a photo attached stating that the issue was resolved. Her reply was a single sentence. The fine of $100 for the initial violation remains outstanding. That week, the war of attrition began in earnest. I received a $50 fine because the grass in my front yard was, and I quote, measured at an average height of 4.25 inches, exceeding the 4.0-inch maximum. She must have come onto my property with a ruler. The absurdity was breathtaking. I mowed the lawn that evening, setting my mower to its lowest possible setting, practically scalping the turf. 2 days later, a $75 fine for visible lawn discoloration due to improper mowing height. It seemed every action I took to comply was twisted into a new violation. I was clearing out the old, weed-choked flower beds my mother had once tended, preparing the soil for new plantings. The next morning, a notice for unapproved landscaping alterations was waiting for me. I was fined $200 for pulling weeds. The list grew longer, the reasons more bizarre. A fine for a non-conforming, decorative item turned out to be for my grandfather's old, weathered birdhouse that had been perched on a fence post for 50 years. A fine for improper driveway maintenance, because my gravel driveway wasn't paved asphalt like everyone else's. A fine for the unseemly appearance of my front windows, which were dusty from sitting vacant before I arrived. Each notice was a paper cut, and the fines were the salt poured into the wound. I tried to reason with her. I called the phone number listed on the violation notices. It went straight to a voicemail box that was conveniently full. I sent emails referencing the clause in the original development plan that clearly showed my lot as a carve-out. Her replies were dismissive, boilerplate responses about how the Architectural Review Committee, which I suspected was just her, had universal jurisdiction to protect property values. She was building a wall of bureaucracy around herself, and I was on the outside with the growing stack of bills. My neighbors were no help. I'd wave to them as they power walked by in the mornings, and they'd offer a tight, nervous smile and a quick nod before hurrying on their way. They were terrified of her. One afternoon, I saw her berating an elderly man, Mr. Henderson, for having a small flag of his favorite college football team in his flower bed. He looked utterly defeated as he trudged back to his house to remove it. I was a stranger here, an outsider who had inherited a